Welcome to the darkness. Listen closely. Some stories are told in daylight. These aren't those stories. Before we begin, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You're going to want to hear what happens next. This is a true account from someone who learned the hard way that some mysteries are better left unsolved. Her name is Sarah Mitchell, and what happened to her in a small Pennsylvania town changed everything she thought she knew about true crime investigation. Lights off, volume up. Let's go. My name's Sarah Mitchell. I'm 34 years old now, though some days I feel older. I've been running a true crime podcast called Cold Trail for the past 6 years. Maybe you've heard of it. We have about 150,000 subscribers, which isn't bad for an independent show. I do this alone. No production team, no corporate backing. Just me and a laptop, and the stories that keep families awake at night. I specialize in a very specific type of case: unsolved disappearances and murders that went cold. I'm talking about cases from the 70s, 80s, 90s, sometimes earlier. Cases that were high profile when they happened, but have since faded into obscurity. Families who spent decades waiting for answers that never came. I live in Philadelphia, not too far from where I grew up. Most of my work is research-based. I spend weeks digging through old newspaper archives, tracking down police reports. Sometimes they're willing to share. Sometimes I have to work around red tape. I interview family members, retired investigators, anyone who is close to the case. But there's something about doing it in person that makes a difference. Sometimes I travel to the actual location where the crime happened. I walk the route the victim took, stand where they stood, try to understand the geography and the community. There's something about being in the actual place that makes the case feel more real, more tangible. The air feels different. The streets have a different energy. I've always been very careful about which cases I choose to investigate. I don't do anything sensational or exploitative. There are a lot of true crime creators out there who treat these stories like entertainment, who prioritize engagement over respect. That's not what I do. I focus specifically on cases where I think attention might actually help. Cases where maybe someone who knows something will hear my episode and finally come forward. Cases where the spotlight might actually lead somewhere. It's happened before. Twice, actually. 2 of the cases I covered led to substantial new leads that eventually helped families get closure. One led to an arrest 12 years after the original crime. That's what keeps me doing this. That's why I keep digging. But the case that came across my desk in September of last year, the Rebecca Hartley case, that one felt different. That one felt like it might be the one I couldn't let go. Rebecca Hartley was 16 years old. On October 12, 1987, she disappeared from a small town called Millbrook, Pennsylvania. She was walking home from a friend's house, a walk she'd made countless times before. Less than half a mile, a route that should have taken maybe 10 minutes. She never made it home. Her mother called the police at 8:40 that evening. Rebecca had said she was leaving her friend's house around 7:30. It was still light out. The route was safe. There was no reason to worry. But by 8:40, Rebecca should have been home. She wasn't answering her phone, payphones back then, of course, so they had to wait for her to call. At 8:40, they called the police. The police arrived at 9 p.m. By 9:30, they'd begun a search of the route between her friend's house and her home. By midnight, officers were searching the surrounding area. By dawn, there were search dogs. By the next morning, there were volunteers, dozens of them, combing through the forest around Millbrook, dredging the creek that ran through the area, checking every abandoned building. 2 weeks of intensive searching. Nothing. No body, no clothing, no sign of struggle, no witnesses who could say they saw her after she left her friend's house. Rebecca Hartley simply vanished, as if the earth had opened up and swallowed her whole. After 6 months, the search wound down. Police pursued a few theories: runaway, abduction, accident. But none of them led anywhere concrete. No evidence, no leads, no breakthroughs. Her parents remained active in trying to find her. They gave interviews, appeared on local news, kept her case alive. But as years turned into decades, the urgency faded. Rebecca's mother died in 2002 without ever knowing what happened to her daughter. Her father passed 4 years later. Same fate. The case file remained officially open, but no one had actively investigated it in decades. When I stumbled across Rebecca's case last year while researching missing person cases from that era, something about it grabbed me. Maybe it was the photo. A smiling 16-year-old with kind eyes and a whole future ahead of her. Maybe it was the fact that her family had been waiting 37 years without answers. or maybe it was something else. Something I can't quite explain. The case felt important. The case felt right. I spent about 3 weeks doing preliminary research before I reached out to the family. 3 weeks of late nights, reading every newspaper article I could find, tracking down the names of the lead investigators. Both are retired now, searching for any information about what happened to Rebecca Hartley. Most importantly, I found her younger sister. Jennifer Hartley was only 13 when Rebecca disappeared. She's in her early 50s now. She still lives in Millbrook. All those years, she's been carrying the weight of her sister's disappearance. All those years, waiting for someone to care enough to look into it again. I called Jennifer one evening in mid-September. I was nervous. I always am when I reach out to families. You're calling someone whose life was defined by tragedy. You're asking them to relive their pain. She answered on the 4th ring. Hello? Hi, is this Jennifer Hartley? Yes. Who's this? My name is Sarah Mitchell. I run a true crime podcast called Cold Trail. I'm calling because I've been researching the case of your sister, Rebecca. I was wondering if you'd be willing to talk to me about her and about what happened back in 1987. There was a long pause. How did you get this number? She asked carefully. I explained how I'd tracked her down through public records, old addresses, social media, the usual tools we use. I promised her that I wasn't a journalist looking for a sensational story, that I treated these cases with respect, that my only goal was to help bring attention to what happened to Rebecca. She was cautious. I could hear the wariness in her voice. She told me she'd been approached before by journalists and documentarians, and most of them just wanted the drama without the substance. They wanted tears and emotional moments for their camera, not truth. But something in my voice, I guess, convinced her that I was different. Okay, she said finally. But not over the phone. If you want to know what happened to Rebecca, you need to come to Millbrook. You need to come and see this place for yourself. You need to understand what kind of town it is. We talked for almost 2 hours that night. She told me about Rebecca, what she was like, her dreams. Rebecca wanted to be a teacher. She was smart, popular, involved in school activities. There was no indication she was troubled or wanted to run away. She was happy. Jennifer told me about the night she disappeared, about how their mother called the police, about how the search was conducted, about how it all led to nothing. She told me about the grief that never quite went away, the questions that were never answered. And then, near the end of our conversation, she told me something that made my pulse quicken. People don't like to talk about it, she said quietly. Even now, after all this time, if you come up here asking questions, you might not get the welcome you're expecting. Why is that? I asked. Because this town has secrets, she said. And I think Rebecca got too close to one of them. But Sarah? You need to come here to understand. You need to see Millbrook for yourself. I can't explain it over the phone. She hesitated before continuing. A few weeks before Rebecca disappeared, she was working on a school history project. She was interviewing older residents of the town, asking them about what Millbrook was like in the old days. She said, one of the people she interviewed told her something strange, something about the old mill and what used to happen there. Rebecca wanted to investigate more. She was excited about it. She thought she'd found something important. What happened? I asked. She disappeared, Jennifer said simply. Then she added something that still echoes in my head. If you come up here, be careful. Millbrook isn't like other small towns. It protects its own. And if people think you're a threat to that, they'll make sure you understand the consequences. I should have listened more carefully to that warning, but I was too invested, too convinced that I might be able to help this family finally get answers. I promised Jennifer I'd come to Millbrook. We set up a meeting time. I told her I'd be there within 2 weeks. I didn't know what I was walking into. 2 weeks later, I loaded up my car with all my equipment, recording devices, my laptop, backup drives, notebooks, everything I needed for a week-long investigation. I drove northwest from Philadelphia on a cold morning in late September, heading toward Millbrook. The drive took about 3 hours. The further I got from the city, the more rural things became. The highways turned into smaller roads. The development turned into farmland, then forest. Millbrook appears suddenly. You're driving through dense trees, and then all at once there's a town. Population 2,400, according to the faded sign at the town limits. It's one of those places that time forgot. The main street is maybe 2 blocks long. There's a small diner called Betty's, a post office, a gas station, a few shops that look like they haven't been updated in 30 years. Some of the storefronts are boarded up. Some look closed permanently. The brick facades are weathered, faded. There's a general feeling of decline, like the town reached its peak decades ago and has been slowly winding down ever since. I learned later that the decline started when the textile mill closed in 1979. Before that, Millbrook had been a thriving place. The mill employed most of the town. Families had lived there for generations. It was economically stable, if not particularly wealthy. When the mill shut down, a lot of people left. They looked for work elsewhere. The ones who stayed were the ones with deep roots. Families that had been there for generations. People who couldn't imagine living anywhere else. People whose entire identity was wrapped up in this small Pennsylvania town. The surrounding area is mostly residential streets lined with old houses. Many of them are well maintained, but many are not. There are a few that are clearly abandoned. Beyond the residential streets, the area transitions to farmland and then quickly to dense forest. Appalachian forest. Thick, dark, ancient-looking trees that seem to swallow the light. I arrived on a Tuesday afternoon in late September. The weather was cool. Autumn was creeping in. The leaves on the trees lining Main Street were just beginning to turn yellow and orange with hints of red. The sun was low in the sky and the shadows were getting long. I'd booked a room at the only motel in town, a place called the Millbrook Inn. It was exactly what you'd expect. A single-story building, about a dozen rooms, located just off Main Street. The exterior was faded beige. The sign was a bit weathered. There was a small office with a front desk and a parking lot with maybe 20 spaces. I pulled into the lot and got out. The parking lot was mostly empty. Just a few other cars, probably guests. I grabbed my main suitcase and headed to the office. The woman at the front desk was probably in her 60s, gray hair pulled back in a bun. She was reading a magazine when I walked in. She looked up and I watched her expression shift as she assessed me. A young woman alone, with out-of-state plates, looking uncomfortable and slightly lost. "Checking in?" she asked. "Yes." I called ahead. "Sarah Mitchell?" "Right." She pulled out her registration book, an old-fashioned pen and paper system, not a computer. "You'll be in room 7. As I filled out the form, she studied me over her reading glasses. "Visiting family?" she asked. "No, I'm here doing research, for a podcast. True crime stories." Her expression changed. Not angry exactly, but guarded. Cautious. "What case?" she asked. "Rebecca Hartley. The girl who disappeared in 1987. The woman was quiet for a moment. She set her magazine down and leaned forward slightly. "Everyone remembers," she said flatly. "But nobody wants to talk about it. You might want to keep that in mind while you're here." It was the same warning Jennifer had given me. I thanked the woman and took my key, an actual key attached to a plastic diamond-shaped keychain with the number 7 on it. Room 7 was at the end of the light of rooms, a small space with a double bed that sagged slightly in the middle, dated floral wallpaper, a small bathroom with a shower. There was a window that looked out on the parking lot and the street beyond. A TV from the 90s sat on a small dresser. It was clean, at least, tidy, just worn and tired looking, like everything else in this town. I unpacked my equipment and set up my laptop on the small desk in the corner. I had my voice recorder, my backup drives, my notebooks. I pulled up my research files and made a list of the people I wanted to interview. Jennifer Hartley, Rebecca's sister. We arranged to meet the next morning at her house. Frank Morrison, the retired police chief who'd led the investigation into Rebecca's disappearance. Rebecca's former classmates. I had names from the newspaper articles covering the initial search, members of the volunteer search team, neighbors from the area where Rebecca went missing, anyone who might know something about the mill and what Rebecca had been investigating for her school project. After I'd organized my notes, I decided to walk around town. I wanted to get a feel for the place. I wanted to understand the geography, the layout, the atmosphere. I wanted to feel what Rebecca would have felt that evening when she was walking home. It was about 4:30 in the afternoon. The sun was low. The streets were quiet. I walked slowly through town, trying to pay attention, trying to understand this place. There weren't many people out. I passed maybe a dozen people during that walk. A woman carrying groceries, 2 teenagers, an older man sitting on a porch. Everyone stared at me, not just a glance or a curious look. Actual stares. lingering stares. Like they knew I didn't belong there. Like they'd already decided I was a threat. I tried smiling at a few of them. No smiles back, just more stares. By the time I reached the diner, my skin was crawling. Betty's Diner was the kind of place that probably looked the same in 1987 as it does now. Vinyl booths, a long counter with swivel stools, a pie case with a few options, a few dated signs advertising specials, ketchup bottles, and napkin dispensers on every table. There were maybe 6 other people inside when I walked in. All of them turned to look at me. I sat at the counter and ordered a burger and a coffee. The waitress, a woman in her 40s with tired eyes and dyed black hair, brought me a water glass without saying much. She took my order and disappeared into the kitchen. While I waited, I became very aware of the silence. The only sounds were the coffee maker, the sizzle from the grill in the back, and the occasional clink of utensil. No one was talking. People were eating, but quietly, and every few seconds, I'd catch someone glancing at me. When my burger arrived, I tried to make conversation. "I'm Sarah," I said with a smile. "I'm in town doing research on an old case. Rebecca Hartley? She disappeared from here back in 1987. I was wondering if you might have known her. Or, don't know anything about that," the waitress said quickly, cutting me off. Her tone was sharp, final. She'd already turned away, was moving to the next table. But I was wondering if... I said I don't know anything. She didn't even look back. She just kept walking. I ate my burger in silence. It was good. The diner did decent food, but I couldn't enjoy it. The feeling of being watched, of being an outsider, of being unwanted, was too strong. I paid the bill and left. As I walked back to the motel, I had that distinct feeling that I was being followed. I turned around several times, but the street was empty. Just me and the sound of my footsteps on the sidewalk. Just the wind picking up as the sun touched the horizon. Back in my room, I tried to shake off the unease. Small towns were always a little suspicious of outsiders, especially journalists or podcasters. It was normal. I dealt with it before in other investigations. I spent a few hours reviewing my research notes and preparing questions for Jennifer. I made some tea and sat by the window, watching the sun set over Millbrook. Around 11 p.m., I got ready for bed. I locked the door, actually locked it. Checked it twice to make sure it was secure. I'd usually never be this careful, but something about this town made me uneasy. I was just getting into bed when I heard it. Footsteps, outside my room, on the concrete walkway that ran in front of the motel rooms. At first I thought it might be another guest, but the footsteps were measured, deliberate, slow. I sat up in bed and listened. The footsteps continued. They came from the direction of the office, moving toward my room. I held my breath. The footsteps stopped, directly outside my door. I could picture someone standing out there, standing right outside my window and door, just standing there. 30 seconds passed. It felt like an eternity. Then the footsteps started again, moving away, slowly fading into the distance until they were gone. I got up and looked out the window. The parking lot was empty, except for my car. The walkway in front of my room was empty. No one was there. I told myself it was just another guest at the motel. Maybe someone stepping outside for a cigarette or a walk. But something about it felt wrong. The deliberateness of it. The way the footsteps had stopped, right at my door. Like someone had checked to make sure I was there. I double-checked the door lock and got back into bed. I lay there for a long time, listening to the sounds of the motel settling, the occasional car passing on the street outside. Eventually, I fell into an uneasy sleep, waking several times during the night at small sounds. The next morning, I drove to Jennifer's house. She lived about 2 miles outside of town, down a gravel driveway lined with tall trees. The house was modest, a ranch-style home, well-maintained, surrounded by forest on 3 sides. It was the kind of place where you could imagine a family living quietly away from the noise of town. Jennifer was waiting for me on the porch. She was in her early 50s with short brown hair and a kind but profoundly sad face. The kind of face that carries a weight. 37 years is a long time to carry unanswered questions about your sister's disappearance. She invited me inside. Her home was tidy and warm. Family photos on the walls. Photos of Rebecca, frozen in time, a smiling teenager with her whole life ahead of her. We sat at her kitchen table. Jennifer made coffee. For the first hour, we just talked. Not about the case, but about Rebecca. About who she was, what she was like. Jennifer told me that Rebecca was smart, genuinely smart, not just good at school, but intellectually curious. She was interested in everything: books, history, the world. She wanted to be a teacher. She thought it was important to help people learn, to help them understand the world. She was popular, but not in a snobbish way. She had real friends. She was involved in school activities, debate team, student government, drama club. She had plans for the future. She was going to go to college, maybe Penn State or somewhere in that area. She was going to have a life. Jennifer's voice grew quiet as she talked about those days. It was clear she was remembering not just her sister, but also the before time, before everything changed. "Tell me about the night she disappeared," I said gently. Jennifer took a deep breath. It was a Tuesday night. Rebecca had been at her friend Angela's house. They were working on a school project together. Around 7:30, Rebecca called home and said she was heading back. It was still light out. Not completely light, but the sun hadn't set yet. The walk between Angela's house and our house was maybe 2/3 of a mile. Mostly along Elm Street, which is well lit and runs through residential areas. Rebecca had made that walk dozens of times before. Hundreds of times, probably. "What time did you usually get home?" From Angela's, normally about 10 or 15 minutes. She could have done it in less, but she'd usually stop at a friend's house or chat with people she knew. So by 7:45, 8 at the latest, she should have been home. "When did your parents realize something was wrong?" "When she wasn't home by 8:30. My mother called Angela's house. Angela's mom said Rebecca had definitely left, had been there about 45 minutes earlier. So mom called the police. They arrived at about 9 p.m. and the search started right away. They checked the route between Angela's house and ours first, very carefully. Then they expanded out. By the next morning, there were search dogs. By the end of the first day, there were probably 200 volunteers combing through the woods, checking the creek that runs through the area, searching every building. They searched for weeks, months, really. But they never found anything. No body, no clothing, nothing. I asked Jennifer more questions about the night, about Rebecca's friends, about whether there were any warning signs or strange behavior in the weeks leading up to her disappearance. Nothing unusual. Rebecca had been happy. She was excited about school, excited about her future. She hadn't been secretive or withdrawn. She hadn't mentioned anyone who was bothering her or making her uncomfortable. Then I asked the question I'd been waiting to ask. "Jennifer, on the phone, you mentioned that Millbrook has secrets, that Rebecca might have gotten close to one. What did you mean?" Jennifer's expression changed. She looked uncomfortable. She glanced toward the window as if checking to make sure no one was listening outside. "There's something in this town," she said quietly. "Something that people don't talk about. Something that's been here for a long time." "What do you mean?" "My grandmother told me about it once. She was from an old family. Her parents had lived here since the early 1900s. She told me there are families here, old families, ones that have been here since the town was founded, who've always had a lot of influence. Control over things." "What kind of control?" "Everything. Who gets hired, who gets contracts, who the police investigate and who they don't, who gets prosecuted for crimes and who doesn't. My grandmother said that sometimes people who ask too many questions or get too close to things they shouldn't know, they disappear." A chill ran down my spine. "Are you saying you think that's what happened to Rebecca?" "I don't know for sure. But a few weeks before she disappeared, Rebecca came to me and said she'd found something. She was doing a history project for school, interviewing older people in town about what Millbrook was like in the old days. She said one of the people she interviewed, a man named Walter Gaines, who used to work at the mill, had told her something strange." "What did he tell her?" "She didn't go into detail, but she said it was about the mill, about things that happened there. Things that didn't add up. She said Walter had told her that people sometimes disappeared in connection with the mill, that there were stories, rumors, things that people knew but didn't talk about." "Did she say what these stories were?" "No, just that she thought it was important, that she wanted to investigate more. She was excited about it. She thought she'd found something for her school project that could actually help people understand the truth about Millbrook." Jennifer's voice broke slightly, and then, a few days later, she was gone. I asked Jennifer if she still had Rebecca's school project, the notes from her interview with Walter Gaines. "Yes, actually," Jennifer said. "I kept all of Rebecca's things. After she disappeared, I couldn't bring myself to throw anything away. Everything's in a box in the basement. Let me get it for you." Jennifer disappeared downstairs and came back a few minutes later with a cardboard box labeled Rebecca's School Projects in faded handwriting. Inside were notebooks, printed essays, photos from school events, and a folder labeled Local History Project Interviews. Inside that folder were several sheets of lined paper filled with Rebecca's handwriting. I read through them carefully. Most of the notes were standard local history. Stories about the town's founding, memories of what life was like in the 50s and 60s, anecdotes about the early days of Millbrook. But then I came to the interview with Walter Gaines. What I read made my skin crawl. According to Walter, he had worked at the Millbrook textile mill, starting in the early 60s. He described the conditions: long hours, dangerous equipment, minimal safety precautions. He talked about workers getting injured, but being paid to keep quiet. He talked about the mill owners covering up accidents. But then the notes became more disturbing. Walter described a section of the mill that was off limits to most workers: the basement level. He said he'd heard rumors about what happened down there: chemical storage, waste disposal, illegal activities, things that weren't on any official record. And he said something that made my hands shake as I read Rebecca's neat handwriting. 3 men I knew went down to that basement and never came back up. Nobody reported them missing. Nobody looked for them. It was like they never existed. At the bottom of the page, Rebecca had written, in slightly different handwriting, "Rushed, urgent. Need to investigate mill basement. This could be huge. WG said the families control everything. If he's right, this changes everything." I looked up from the notes. "Did Rebecca go to the mill?" I asked. "Before she disappeared." Jennifer nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. "The day before. She told me she was going with a friend to explore the mill, to try to find the basement that Walter had told her about. She made me promise not to tell our parents, because she knew they'd say no. She said she'd be back by dinner." "Did she come back?" "Yes, but she was scared. She said they'd found something. She said she had to think about what to do with the information. She said she needed to talk to me about it, but not right then. Our parents were in the other room." "What happened after that?" "She went to bed. The next day, she went to school. That evening, she went to Angela's house. She never came home." I was quiet for a moment, absorbing what I was hearing. "What was the name of the friend who went with her to the mill?" Jennifer hesitated. Angela Morrison." The name hit me like a punch. "Is she related to Frank Morrison, the police chief?" "His daughter. She still lives here. But Sarah, she won't talk to you. Her father made sure of that. He's protected her from anyone asking questions about that night." Over the next 2 days, I tried to interview Rebecca's former classmates. Most of them refused to talk to me. When I managed to reach people willing to meet, they said very little. She was a nice girl. It was tragic. We all missed her. Generic responses with no substance. No one wanted to go on record. No one wanted to share actual details or memories. It was like an invisible wall had been erected around Rebecca's case. On my 3rd day in Millbrook, I contacted Frank Morrison, the retired police chief. I expected him to refuse to see me, but surprisingly, he agreed to meet me at the diner for coffee. I arrived at Betty's at 10 a.m. Frank was already there, sitting in a booth. He was in his 70s now, a big man with white hair, a gruff demeanor, hands that looked like they'd done hard work. He was wearing a flannel shirt and jeans. He had a coffee in front of him. I sat across from him. "Thanks for meeting with me," I said. "Not sure if you should be thanking me yet," he said. "Let's hear what you want to know." I asked him about the investigation. He gave me the official version, the extensive search, the dead ends, the theories that didn't pan out. He described the initial investigation with professional detail, but without emotion. It was like he was reciting facts he'd memorized. I probed a bit deeper, asking if he thought there was more to the case than a random abduction. His expression hardened. He set down his coffee cup carefully. "Listen," he said, his voice low. "I understand you're trying to help. I respect that. But you need to understand something. You're stirring up old ghosts. That case is cold for a reason. There's nothing to find. But what if there is?" I said. "What if Rebecca didn't just disappear? What if something happened that was covered up?" He leaned across the table. When he spoke, his voice was quieter, but somehow more intense. "You need to listen to me very carefully," he said. I'm going to say this once, and then we're done talking about this. You need to leave this alone, for your own good. Are you threatening me? I'm warning you. Millbrook doesn't need someone like you coming in here digging around in things that don't concern you. We're a quiet town. We like to keep things peaceful. There are people here who would very much like to keep certain things quiet. People with resources, people with power, people who take their privacy very seriously. He stood up. He placed a $10 bill on the table. Go back to Philadelphia, he said. Find another case. This one is not your story to tell. Then he walked out, leaving me sitting in the diner booth, my hands shaking. A few other patrons had noticed the exchange. People looked away when I made eye contact. The waitress suddenly became very busy behind the counter. That night, back at the motel, I discovered my room had been searched. It was subtle, nothing obvious, but I'd set a mental note of where I left things. My laptop was in a slightly different position on the desk. My suitcase zipper was in a different place. A drawer wasn't quite closed all the way. A notebook had been moved. Someone had gone through my belongings while I was out. I reported it to the front desk. The same woman from check-in looked at me with that same guarded expression. I haven't seen anyone go into your room, she said flatly. Someone was in there. My things were moved. Maybe you just forgot how you left them. I didn't forget. She stared at me for a moment. Then she said, quietly, maybe you should think about checking out early. Maybe Millbrook might not be the right place for your podcast. I didn't check out, but I did move my most important equipment, my laptop and backup drives, into my car. I kept them with me after that, never left them unattended. That night, I heard the footsteps again. Around 2 a.m. they came, slow, deliberate. They stopped outside my door for exactly 90 seconds, then moved on. The next night, the same thing. 2 a.m., 90 seconds outside my door. By the fourth night, I'd stopped being scared and started being angry and determined. Whoever was watching me, whoever was trying to intimidate me, they'd confirmed that I was getting close to something. They confirmed that Rebecca's case wasn't a simple disappearance. They confirmed that there was something in Millbrook worth protecting. On my fourth night in Millbrook, I decided I had to go to the mill. Everything pointed there. Rebecca had been investigating it. Someone, maybe multiple people, was terrified of what I might uncover about it. The mill had to have answers. The Millbrook textile mill sat on the eastern edge of town, about a mile past the last residential street. It had been abandoned since 1979, more than 45 years. The building showed every bit of that age. The main structure was massive, 3 stories of dark red brick with rows of windows, most of them broken or boarded up. There were outbuildings surrounding it, a loading dock, storage buildings, administrative offices, all in various states of decay. The entire property was surrounded by a chain-link fence with no trespassing signs posted every 20 feet. I arrived around dusk, in the fading light. The sun was low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the property. I parked my car in a side road about a quarter-mile away and walked the rest of the distance. The fence had been cut in several places over the years, probably teenagers exploring or vandals. I found a gap wide enough to slip through and made my way toward the main building. The air smelled like rust and rotting wood. Broken glass crunched under my feet as I approached the main entrance. The main doors were chained shut, but a side door hung open, barely attached to its hinges. I pulled out my flashlight and set my phone to record audio. I didn't know if I'd find anything, but I wanted to document whatever I discovered. I stepped inside. The interior of the mill was a maze. Long hallways lined with empty rooms that had once held machinery. The floors were concrete, cracked and covered in debris. Water dripped somewhere deeper in the building, echoing through the cavernous space. Graffiti covered some of the walls, mostly just tags and initials, nothing of significance. The air inside was cold and damp. Everything smelled like metal and decay. I moved carefully through the building, documenting everything with my phone's camera. I wasn't sure exactly what I was looking for, but Jennifer's words kept echoing in my mind. There are stories about what went on there, accidents that got covered up, workers who disappeared, things that don't add up. I found an old office on the second floor. Desks were still in place, warped and water-stained. Filing cabinets were rusted shut. Papers were scattered everywhere, most of them illegible due to water damage and mold. But there was one filing cabinet that caught my eye. It was less rusted than the others, like it had been treated with some kind of preservative. I tried the drawers. They were stuck, but with some effort, I managed to pry one open. Inside were personnel records, old but preserved. I started flipping through them. Names, dates, job titles. Most dated from the 60s and 70s that I founded. At the back of the drawer, there was a section labeled Basement Assignments in handwritten ink. Below that were names, about 30 of them, each with a date next to it. I pulled out my phone and photographed every page. As I was going through the documents, I heard something that made my blood freeze. Footsteps. Below me, on the first floor, I froze listening. The footsteps were slow, deliberate, moving through the building, moving toward the stairwell. I turned off my flashlight and stood perfectly still in the darkness of the old office. The only light was the fading daylight coming through the broken windows. The footsteps continued. Closer now. They reached the stairs. I heard the first step, then another, slowly, deliberately, coming up. My heart was pounding. My mind raced. There was no reason for anyone else to be here. No one knew I was coming. No one was supposed to know I was at the mill. But someone was here. Someone was climbing the stairs. I moved quietly toward the office door and peered out into the hallway. The stairwell was at the far end. I couldn't see who was coming up, but I could hear the footsteps getting closer. I backed away from the door, looking for another exit. There was a window at the far end of the office. It was small, but I might be able to squeeze through. The footsteps reached the top of the stairs. I moved quickly toward the window, trying not to make a sound. The footsteps entered the hallway. I could see a beam of light. Someone was carrying a flashlight. Then a voice called out through the darkness. You shouldn't be here. Not aggressive, not immediately threatening, but cold, final. I didn't respond. I reached the window and looked out. About 15 feet down to the ground. There was overgrown grass and weeds, but also concrete and metal debris below. If I landed wrong, I'd break something, but I had no choice. Behind me, I heard the man's footsteps moving down the hallway, toward me. I know you're up here, the voice said, and I know who you are, Sarah Mitchell, the podcaster. How did he know my name? I pushed the window open. It creaked loudly in the silent building. I could hear the man's pace quicken. I know what you're looking for, he said, and I'm telling you, you need to stop. I climbed onto the windowsill and looked down again. It was a long way. My hands were shaking. Behind me, the footsteps were very close now. I didn't think. I just jumped. The world spun as I fell through the air. For a moment, it felt like I was suspended in time. Then, impact. I hit the ground hard on my left side. The wind knocked out of my lungs. Pain shot through my ribs, my shoulder, my left ankle. For a moment, I couldn't move. I just lay there, gasping, unable to breathe. Then I heard the footsteps reach the office I'd just exited. The man was looking out the window. The beam of his flashlight swept across the ground where I lay. I forced myself up. Every movement was agony, but adrenaline is a powerful thing. I ran across the mill property, through the gap in the fence, through the overgrown weeds and brush. My left ankle screamed with every step. My ribs ached, but I kept running. I didn't stop until I reached my car. I fumbled with the keys, got the door open, started the engine. I drove away from the mill without turning on my headlights, until I was well away from the property. I drove back to the motel with my hands shaking so badly, I could barely hold the steering wheel. My entire left side ached. I was fairly certain I had at least one broken rib, maybe more. My ankle was swollen. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in my motel room with all the lights on, my laptop open, trying to process what had happened. Someone had followed me to the mill. Someone who knew my name. Someone who wanted me to know they were watching. Someone who wanted me to know I was in danger. I considered leaving, packing up and going back to Philadelphia, dropping the whole case, walking away. But something kept me from doing it. Rebecca Hartley deserved answers. Her family deserved answers. And if someone was trying this hard to scare me off, it meant I was getting close to something. Something real, something dangerous. I transferred all my recordings, all my photos of the personnel records, all my notes to a cloud backup. If something happened to me, at least the evidence would exist. It would be out there. The next morning, I was so sore I could barely move. My ribs were definitely bruised, possibly broken. My ankle was swollen but not completely immobilized. I needed to see Jennifer. I drove to her house. When she opened the door, she took one look at me and went pale. What happened to you? I told her everything. About going to the mill, about the man who was waiting for me there, about the jump and the escape. Her face went white. They know you're digging, she said. You need to leave, Sarah. Now. Who's they? Disintegrated? I asked. The families. The ones who run this town. They don't want anyone looking into the mill, and they definitely don't want anyone connecting it to Rebecca. Then help me understand. What happened at that mill that's worth killing to protect? Jennifer looked at me for a long moment. Then she made a decision. Come with me, she said. She led me to her basement. It was finished, lived in. She had a little sitting area down there with an old couch and a bookshelf. In one corner, behind some boxes, she pulled out a filing box labeled Rebecca's School Projects in faded handwriting. I kept all of her things, Jennifer said quietly. After she disappeared, I couldn't bring myself to throw anything away. Everything she made, everything she wrote, everything that was hers, I kept it. She opened the box and pulled out the folder with Rebecca's local history project notes. She found the interview with Walter Gaines again. Read it again, she said. Really read it this time. I read through Walter's account more carefully. He described working at the mill in the late 60s. Long hours, dangerous conditions, minimal safety precautions. Workers getting injured, but being paid to keep quiet. Accidents being covered up. But then there was the part about the basement. There was a section of the mill, Walter had told Rebecca, where certain workers were taken to do jobs that weren't on any official record. I don't know exactly what those jobs were. I never went down there myself, but I heard rumors. What kind of rumors? Rebecca had asked, her handwriting neat and careful in her notes. Chemical storage, waste disposal, things that weren't legal, things that happened in secret, people who got hurt, people who died. It all got covered up. Did you ever report it? How? To who? The people who owned the mill. They own this town. They own the police. They own the local government. Reporting something like that? That's how you disappear. Did people disappear? 3 men I knew went down to that basement and never came back up. Just gone. Nobody reported them missing. Nobody looked for them. Their families weren't there anymore to look. Some of them had moved on, left town looking for work when the mill started having problems. And the few families that were still here, they knew better than to ask questions. How do you know this? Because I knew those men before they went down. We worked together. And then one day they were gone, and nobody ever mentioned them again. It was like they never existed. Rebecca's handwriting became slightly different at that point. More rushed, more urgent. This is huge. If what Walter is saying is true, there are bodies in that basement. There are crimes that were never prosecuted, families that never got answers. This is a story that needs to be told. People deserve to know the truth about what happened in Millbrook. The truth about what the families who run this town are capable of. And then at the very bottom of the page, written in capital letters, I need to check the basement. I need to find proof. I looked up from the notes. Did she find the basement? I asked. Jennifer nodded. She went with Angela the day before she disappeared. Angela was her best friend. Angela's father is Frank Morrison, the police chief. But Rebecca didn't know that at the time. Or maybe she did. But she didn't realize it would matter. She didn't realize that Angela's family was connected to the families that run this town. What did they find? Jennifer's eyes filled with tears. Bodies, she said. They found bodies in the basement of the mill. Remains, bones, dozens of them. Rebecca wanted to go to the police immediately. She wanted to tell someone to report it. But Angela was scared. Angela told her father what they'd found. And Frank Morrison, Jennifer's voice broke. He made it clear that if they told anyone, if they went to the police, if they did anything to bring attention to what they'd found, they would end up just like the bodies in the basement. What happened to Rebecca? She couldn't live with it, Jennifer said. She said she was going to tell anyway. That people deserved to know. That it was the right thing to do. So she couldn't finish. I understood. Rebecca hadn't run away. She hadn't been randomly abducted. She'd been murdered, silenced, because she discovered evidence of something so dark that the powerful families of Millbrook would kill to protect it. Why are you telling me this now? I asked. Because I've lived with this guilt for 37 years, Angela sobbed, and it was then that I realized I'd misunderstood. Jennifer wasn't just telling me about Angela. Angela herself was speaking through Jennifer's recollection. Because Rebecca was my best friend, and I let them kill her, and because I'm tired of carrying this secret, and because if I don't tell someone, If I don't make sure that the truth comes out, then Rebecca's death means nothing. I never finished the podcast episode about Rebecca Hartley. I wanted to. I had all the research, all the evidence, the recording of Angela's confession, the photographs of the personnel records from the mill, but every attorney I consulted told me the same thing. Without hard evidence, without bodies actually recovered, without an official investigation that substantiated the claims, publishing what I found would be defamation at best and dangerous at worst. The recordings I made, the notes from Rebecca's school project, Angela's confession, it's not enough, not legally, not when the people involved have that much power. I could try to get law enforcement involved, but what would I tell them? That I broke into an abandoned mill? That I found old personnel records that might be evidence of crimes decades ago? That someone followed me? And more importantly, I couldn't be sure who in law enforcement was complicit. Frank Morrison, the police chief who covered up Rebecca's death, had retired, but he'd been retired for a long time. There might be others. There might be a whole network of people in Millbrook who are protecting me's secrets. So instead of publishing the episode, I'm working with some journalists who specialize in investigative pieces. Real journalists with resources and legal backing. We're building a case slowly and carefully. We're gathering more evidence. We're trying to find other victims, other families who've lost someone to the people who run Millbrook. It's slow, it's frustrating, it's dangerous, but Rebecca deserves justice, and I'm going to find a way to give it to her, even if I have to spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder. If you've made it this far, let me ask you something. How many small towns across America have secrets like this? How many missing people were silenced because they got too close to the truth? How many families have been looking for answers for decades while powerful people protected their own secrets? Drop a comment if you've ever felt like you were being watched in a small town. Or if you've heard stories about places where people don't ask questions. Or if you know something about Millbrook, Pennsylvania. Hit that like button if this story disturbed you. Subscribe for more true horror stories from people who investigated things they shouldn't have. And remember, sometimes the most dangerous monsters aren't supernatural. They're human, and they're protecting something, and they'll do whatever it takes to keep that secret safe. Thanks for watching. Be careful what you investigate. I'll see you in the next one.